Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our consulting presentation tonight. I would like to begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we live, work, and gather and meet tonight. I know we're coming from, obviously, from home, but for most of us, we're meeting in the homes of the Turrbal and the Yagara peoples, and I would just like to pay our respects to all elders past, present and future, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples that we may have with us today. So just a few Zoom housekeeping announcements and just sort of how this night will work. We already have an order in which teams will sort of play their videos, and then after that we'll accept questions from the audience, which I think Chris has already put up a link where you can submit questions. Yeah, and then after that, we'll sort of, after each video, we'll sort of ask the questions and moderate that discussion. And generally that will be about 5 minutes, just in the interest of time to make sure presentations don't go to overtime. Yes, and we just like to ask, obviously, if you're not doing Q&A, just to keep your microphones muted, that way so we can hear the participants give their answers properly. And I think that's all we sort of have for tonight. So I guess we'll just get started with our first team, which I think is Brain Consulting. So I think someone was going to share their slides.
So Gene Consulting, Gene Energy. So that would be Evie. I think you'd be able to share your screen.
Yeah, hi guys. Do you want me to share my screen now?
Yes.
Alrighty, we'll get started.
Good evening, my name is Nishi.
Hi, my name is Joseph Trendle.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Evie, and we are here today as members of Gene Energy to present our proposal regarding how Australia can adapt strategies utilised by other countries to transition our nation's energy sector and battle the global climate emergency. Let's start off by taking a look at Australia's current energy industry. When it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, Australia's electricity sector contributes the highest 32% proportion of the nation's total. In hope to reduce such a figure, our proposal today will specifically focus on methods and strategies that can be employed to transform and decarbonise Australia's electricity industry. Currently, electricity generation in Australia is sourced from approximately 24% renewable sources, with the remaining 76% generated from fossil fuels. Moving into a more sustainable future of Australia's electricity industry, Gene Energy has determined 4 major areas of improvement needed to support a shift.
To improve and transition the Australian electricity sector successfully, it is important that we follow successful models employed elsewhere across the globe. One example of this is the National Energy Transformation in Germany, whose government has been following the plan laid out in its Energiewende program. Energiewende, which originated in the early 2000s, follows decades of German electricity supply shifting from coal and oil and denuclearization. The main goals for the program are to increase the share of renewables incrementally over a period of several decades, finally achieving 80 to 90% cuts in the greenhouse emissions relative to its 1990 emissions by the year 2050. In Germany, Australia had also been following an incremental policy introduced in 2001, known as the Renewable Energy Target. The Renewable Energy Target was a major policy and has had significant impact on Australia's energy industry in the last decade. The RET proposed that at least 33,000 gigawatt hours of Australia's electricity will be generated by renewable energy by 2020. It is now 2020 and such a target has been met. And while individual states such as Queensland and Victoria have introduced incentives to reach 50% renewable energy by 2030, currently there are no plans for a new national target in place. With the original RET successfully increasing renewable energy deployment, the benefits of increasing and extending the RET are clear-cut. Yet Australia lags behind Germany in taking such initiative. Out of all the renewable energy sources being installed en masse in Germany, wind power has raced ahead to take the dominant position. Wind power has been present in both Australia and Germany for some time. Recent technological advances have made it, however, much more viable as an alternative. In Germany currently, the newest fleet, as of 2018, are of the 3 to 5 megawatt class, as compared to earlier in the century when the market was dominated by 2 to 3 megawatts. Additionally, average rotor diameter now sits at 109 meters, with an average height of 128 meters, which equate to increases of 88 and 80% respectively from the year 2000. Currently, wind power generates 7% of Australia's electricity and over a quarter of Germany's. One pertinent challenge both nations face in respect to the wind power are the limitations that are imposed by existing network capabilities. In Australia, the pace of wind power farm installations and other renewable energy sources has outmatched government spending and upgrading of transmission lines, as well as corporate spending in these areas. This has upset many groups inside the industry, even causing major industries to altogether quit the Australian market on future endeavours. Germany has also faced a similar problem, as geographically most wind farms in their country are north, while most of the industrial and population centres lie in the south. Thus, the current network capabilities are not able to easily transport the electricity between the two areas. This predicament has led to redispatch measures, curtailing the amount of generation allowed in the north, which reduces congestion on the grid but also costs taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars annually.
To expand on the issue of transmission infrastructure in Australia, one must consider the challenges created by the vast yet sparsely populated landscape of the nation. With wind power farms primarily located in South Australia, one current issue the industry is facing is the pace of wind power installation exceeding network infrastructure investment and upgrade, and hence the inability for the rest of the nation to benefit from the power generated. Currently, the largest market in the Australian electricity sector is the National Electricity Market. Initiated in 1999 to integrate southern and eastern states, the NEM consists of a continuous grid across eastern Australia, constructed to transmit energy from coal-fired power stations to city centres. The NEM grid network plays a major role in the transition towards renewables with its ability to carry electricity across large areas when needed. However, to utilise wind and other renewable energy sources at a higher capacity, Australia's transmission infrastructure must be structured in a flexible and dynamic way to accommodate for the fluctuation in the power output for such renewable sources, which can be dependent on uncontrollable environmental and weather conditions. To create a more efficient electricity network, the geographical connectivity of Australia's current network will need to be significantly improved. Simon Bartlett, the former Chief Operating Officer for Powerlink Queensland and previous Chair of Electricity Transmission at the University of Queensland, proposed that it is feasible to directly interconnect the existing South Australian and Queensland grids, which would halve the distance between Queensland and South Australia, as well as bypass high transmission losses and congestion on the existing grid through the other states. Developing this national energy market interconnector would also alleviate the current high pool prices and enable further development of Australia's renewable energy resources.
In the German program, Energy Wende policies include feed-in tariffs, emissions trading schemes, carbon pricing, investment in renewables, energy cooperatives, and other policies. Additionally, large efforts have been made to restructure the German federal government, with a ministry made to specifically handle renewable energy development and the environment. Collectively, these policies have led to Germany now being a world leader in renewable energy technology, including photovoltaics and wind power, as well as being far ahead of other OECD countries in terms of electricity generation by renewables as a percentage of the total energy generation. Of course, there are problems with the country faces, including the wind power transmission setbacks discussed just previously, and increasing reliance on Russian gas. But with continued work being done by the government and following the principles of energy win-win, the government remains confident it will very probably be able to manage these issues and complete its goals by the 2050 end date.
Another country with a considerably different energy industry is Japan. Their current energy policy is based on 3 key strategies: strengthening their energy security, implementing energy conservation and renewable energy policies that consider environmental concerns alongside growth, and balancing public interest issues with market liberalisation and growing competition. These strategies were proposed following the Fukushima disaster in 2014. The specific policies introduced include hydrogen development, commitment to climate change, nuclear power, and energy systems. These policies all have potential for success and could also be implemented in Australia. Japan hopes to create a hydrogen-based society to make them more self-sufficient, as currently 94% of their energy supply is imported. Ultimately, their goal is to commercialise the supply chain of hydrogen and its use in the power generation field to lower hydrogen production costs so it can compete with fossil fuels. Interestingly, there's already an existing collaboration between Japan and Australia with regards to converting brown coal to hydrogen. Australia could easily adopt a similar approach and take advantage of its solar, wind, coal and gas reserves to produce hydrogen. Japan also has climate change commitments based on the Paris Agreement that require it to invest in low-carbon energy sources. This plan involves accelerating the development of renewable energy. However, the Japan government still views nuclear as an important source due to its stability, efficiency, and low operational costs. With respect to Australia, the implementation of renewable energy is feasible as they have high solar energy and wind potential. In fact, moving towards 100% renewable energy would be safe and cheaper than the current practices. In contrast, Australia seems unlikely to ever go nuclear due to the political climate and dependence on coal. Additional policy measures include the liberalisation of the retail energy market. This change saw greater competition as over 400 new Japanese companies and additional foreign companies registered to become electricity retailers. This increased competition is evident by the fact that 13% of households have changed their electricity supplies. In contrast, Australia has a limited number of energy companies, and this lack of competition has seen a marked increase in prices. Another phase recently implemented is that the 10 major regulated utility companies were forced to unbundle, meaning they had to separate power generation and retail functions from the transmission and distribution function. This ensures one company can't dominate the market and conduct multiple categories of energy business. These reforms promote fair competition, which benefits renewable energy companies as they have yet to make sufficient headway into the energy sector.
When exploring Australia's transition to a more sustainable energy network, one major issue that emerges is Australia's reliance on coal, not just for its own internal energy consumption, but for exports as well. Australia is one of the largest producers and exporters of coal. The Reserve Bank of Australia reported that 75% of coal produced in 2017 was exported. Australia's highly dependent relationship with the coal industry presents major challenges regarding the integration of renewable energy sources into the Australian electricity grid, pushing renewable energy investment downwards.
With the example of Germany's investment in low-carbon energy sources and Japan's focus on a diversity of energy sources including nuclear, there are clearly alternative pathways than using coal as a primary energy source. However, a decreased reliance on coal as an energy source in Australia would impact not just the environment, but the economy and employment as well. We all know what kind of environmental detriment coal brings. However, an argument against reducing reliance on coal arrives in the impact on the economy and employment. In terms of employment, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2014, 37,800 people were employed in coal mining. Therefore, we must accommodate for the changing labour market that a decrease in coal production would bring. European countries have implemented a Just Transition program that assists in a transition from coal to clean energy. The program offers suggestions on how to ease the transition by involving a range of representatives in the process, planning early foreclosures and diversifying the regional economy, as well as establishing the funds and institutional structures for a just transition. Economically, while coal is used as a major export of Australia, the global coal consumption is expected to go into reverse. Australia exports coal to India and China, but if these countries reduce their coal consumption, this could massively impact Australia's exports. Australia's external dependence is already proving to be a downfall with the current health crisis. ABC News reported how the outbreak of COVID-19 had smashed demand for fossil fuels this year. The article explains how the International Energy Agency forecasts multi-decade lows for the global consumption of coal, oil and gas in 2020, but that renewable energy has proved resilient to the shock. Therefore, Australia's current reliance on coal needs to decrease. Australia could be proactive about this by implementing the new technologies that other countries have to offer, as well as the social programs that would benefit all Australians.
And that's all from us. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for that lovely video. There were some really great transitions and also some really good information on how Australia can learn from Germany and Japan in terms of hydrogen-based systems and also in terms of wind power. Did we have any questions at all from anyone?
We haven't had any questions yet. If anyone has a question that they'd want to ask, we can just ask it on the Zoom group chat right now. I guess I'll ask the first question. So if everyone who's in that team could switch on your webcams, just when you're answering the question. So I guess my question is, you mentioned about having to dramatically reduce the coal exports from Australia. Have you considered any negative impacts that would have on the Australian energy market? Just make sure you're unmuted.
If someone wants to take that question.
Sorry, just one sec. We're just missing a team member.
Oh no.
Yeah. Do you want to go?
So Emma was the person who kind of answered most of that section. Is there any chance we can jump to another question and then circle?
Sorry, my internet.
Okay. Yeah. We're having internet problems.
I didn't do any of the much of the research for that section.
Internet connections on stage.
Okay, Emma, I think your internet's pretty good now.
That's good. Sorry, what was the question?
Sorry, so yeah, the question was, so you mentioned in the report about exporting most of your coal to dramatically reducing the export of coal. What do you think would be the negative impacts of that on the Australian economy and just the energy industry as a whole?
Yeah. Of exporting coal?
Yes.
Sorry, I might have to keep my video off, but
Yeah.
The negative impact of exporting coal, sorry, sorry, I'm settled now. Hopefully that's good internet connection. So the negative impact of exporting coal on the economy. One moment.
If not, we have another question that's come up on the in the survey thing.
Yeah, we might just, if it's okay.
Yeah, sorry. It's my internet's really.
Yep, you're fine, Emma. Yeah, just the question. So someone asked, you mentioned diversifying the economic sector in regional areas.
Yes,
how should this be done?
So this would be there would obviously be a job loss if we moved away from coal, particularly in the coal industry. However, there would be job growth in other areas such as renewables, particularly if we invested more heavily in renewables. But there's also a prospect of looking at manufacturing as well, which has been done in other countries. I believe some Asian countries have moved coal workers into manufacturing with re-education and upskilling as well. So diversifying the regional economy would allow to kind of absorb the shock that a reduction in coal jobs would create, if that makes sense. Does anyone have anything to add in that, or no?
Okay, yeah, that's good. So just coming back to, I guess, what I was asking initially. So what would you think would be the negative impact if Australia starts to reduce their coal? Because that was something that you mentioned, that we should stop, should dramatically reduce our coal production. So how would that affect other countries?
Right, so I think this information is correct, hopefully. So from what I can tell, Australia currently exports to mainly China and India at the moment. But of course, the world is kind of moving away from coal. And a point I just want to make, which I didn't have time to include in the presentation, is that people commonly believe that India is heavily reliant on coal because of the energy poverty that's prevalent within India. However, some of the government programs look at leapfrogging the technology and going straight to solar. So India is kind of decreasing their reliance, or looking to decrease their reliance on coal. So that decrease is a major relationship with coal between Australia and India. I'm not too well versed on the situation in China, but I think with the global economy moving away from coal, and that there will obviously be a decreased reliance on coal in that country as well. So if there's a decreased demand, then we'll have to match that with a decreased supply, particularly with the macro economy. And to kind of counter this, Australia will have to look for another export to rely on. And one of those, as I mentioned, could be within manufacturing and looking at exports within the manufacturing industry. I think I saw something come up on the chat. Sorry, I'm just going to read out the question in case someone didn't see it. With the previous question, yes, this is assuming that renewable developments would be in regional areas. If it were not the case, again, you could look into kind of the manufacturing area. So I'm just trying to think about the research I did. I'm just going to pull up something. I remember, one moment, sorry. There was a particular example that I would like to just find for you.
Okay, yeah, I think we'd leave it at that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks
That's
for
okay,
that.
no worries.
Thanks for that, Emma. Thanks for the Q&A.
Yeah, sorry about the internet connection at the start.
No, you're fine. Technical glitches are always going to happen. So that was Gene Energy, guys. Just make sure you have you remember all of the team names, because we are going to be doing a poll later to see which team you like the most. So yep, that first team was team Gene Energy. And yeah, so now we're going on to the next thing. So I just need to share my screen. Okay, so now we are going to team 5. They haven't chosen a name themselves, but yep, their name is team 5. Hopefully everyone can hear that.
Hi guys, this is UQ-SEN Deliverable 3, and we're just going to discuss the application of renewable energy to Australia, also with analysis of both global applications and our analysis of how that installation into Australia would work. First up, we have the Australian energy sector and the identified areas of improvement.
So first of all, we talk about renewable energy target. So renewable energy target, which will expand from the MRET by 2020, including the meeting of the 45,000 gigawatts renewable energy target, but then later on will decrease to 33,000 gigawatts due to the political reason. So in order to respond to the climate change and the reduce in the greenhouse gas emission, the Australian government aims to reduce the Australian total greenhouse gas emission by 5% on 2000 level by 2020 and by 80% on 2000 level by 2015. So we can see that there was many different sector and influence, also application need to be considered in this presentation.
So the Australia energy sector also lacks several utilisation of technologies, such as geothermal, nuclear and offshore wind. The country also lacks policies that encourage the development of offshore wind and introduction of new technologies. These absent technologies and policies in Australia have been successfully utilised in countries such as Germany.
Secondly, we have the effective foreign energy strategies, policies and technologies. In regards to analysis of EU policy framework, most policies based around there demonstrated 3 different primary objectives, those being the promotion of RE or renewable energy technology, the security of domestic supply, and the encouragement of research and development of that energy. As well as a common theme in these was consumer incentives, which are very critical to renewable energy domestic implementation to drive down upfront costs and reduce payback time. In analysis of this area, I've also recognised that the EU does not have a EU-wide program that is responsible for managing both these subsidies and technologies. Rather, governments have introduced policies based around that due to the dependency on application with efficiency. Also observed was a strong feed-in tariff policies, which in turn drives down these incentive upfront costs, which is most prevalent in these regions. Also within this bounds, must note that China's booming solar panel and solar technology industry that is established is responsible for 50% of the world's output of photovoltaic cells, solar-grade polysilicon, and the associated modules within the technology. And its wide due success is because of the establishment of this really well-efficient industry that is producing roughly about 20.5% technically efficient PV cells. In regards to this area, the industrial policy for China is the implementation of feed-in tariffs, as well as encouraging the full purchase of renewable energy technology. The economic incentives within photovoltaic power specifically for China is obtained through price subsidies, direct financial subsidies of initial investments. Secondly, we have the implementation of foreign energy strategies into the Australian landscape. In regards of analysis in incentive schemes observed globally, there's 3 different types. First of all, there's price-driven incentives, which includes that popular feed-in tariffs, which is very popular within solar and wind technology, as well as net metering, which encourages consumers to produce their own technology by monitoring the amount of energy production. There's also quantity-driven incentives, where the government prescribes a certain amount, and quotas, which is based around tradable green certificates and bolstering the energy market. Finally, there's the analysis of implementation with identified advantages and challenges within the Australian landscape. Looking specifically at photovoltaic electricity, there's key issues integrating this technology into the national grids, that being that the balancing of various different energy systems with varying demands is very, very tricky. Introducing photovoltaic cells into the Australian national grid will also experience difficulties with associated supporting technologies such as inverter type generators and converter technologies, which are responsible for reference points. And there'll be a very, very big difficulty bringing the whole system all into alignment. In regards to looking at transmission losses and embodied costs, most of these losses are approximated around 15%. Given that large-scale production is favoured in a very open expanse and the size required, with a further 7% losses in local distribution, which is currently experienced. Also, the analysis of the technology and the final costs sees that roughly about 6.6% for wind technology and 33% for photovoltaic technology is due to the production costs, which in turn drives up the installation costs and decreases popularity or potential investment within the technology.
So I'm talking about the implementation of geothermal, nuclear and offshore. So the implementation of geothermal can be successful if suitable geothermal reservoirs that can provide high fluid flow rate can be located, and the energy produced from those sources can overcome initial capital costs. It is likely geothermal will be implemented in the future, as Australia has excellent geothermal sources, but due to it being too far away from grids and large industrial areas, geothermal is still in the early stages of development. Nuclear can be successfully implemented if the government can find ways to safely run the plants and dispose of any nuclear waste, as well as implement policies or methods for the public to accept nuclear energy. However, it is unlikely nuclear will be implemented into Australia, as it is one of the windiest and sunniest countries, thus providing an abundance of alternative, low-risk, high-reward renewable energy. Offshore wind can be implemented if Australia can find suitable locations and the government introduces new policies that allows them to be constructed. It is likely that offshore wind farms will successfully be implemented since, as of March 2020, a contract to produce 2 gigawatts of energy from offshore wind has been approved.
So finally, we're looking at Australia's implementation, both the short-term and long-term success of that implementation.
So if geothermal was to be successfully implemented, the short term will lead to Australia having to invest in drilling and setting up the stations, thus resulting in high initial costs. Depending on the quality of the reservoir, the clean energy produced in the long run can significantly reduce Australia's greenhouse gas emissions and provide a lot of energy to be sent back into the grid. Conversely, a poor geothermal source can lead to it cooling too quickly, thus reducing the amount of clean energy and economic benefits it was expected to provide. If nuclear was successfully implemented, the short term will lead to more jobs, and assuming the plants will run 24/7, it will provide a reliable source of clean energy and significantly cut down Australia's greenhouse gas emissions. In the long term, however, the mining and disposal of radioactive material will produce significant amounts of greenhouse gas. Thus, it is important to consider if the clean energy produced outweigh the emissions. So for offshore wind, in the short term, it will lead to high initial capital costs due to the difficulty in constructing the turbines in the middle of the ocean and constructing power lines to wire the power back to shore. In the long term, depending on location, offshore wind can provide more energy due to faster and more winds, where it is likely that offshore energy production will surpass onshore. However, the turbines are difficult to maintain and are more likely to get damaged by hail or other natural elements. So in regarding offshore wind, geothermal and nuclear, geothermal and offshore wind technologies are good investments Australia should be considering when trying to reduce the country's emissions. Nuclear energy should not be considered at the very moment due to the abundance of alternative low-risk renewable technologies available.
Looking at renewable energy, spreading, most of them say that the transition for renewable energy should be very quickly, and it is expected that it would be a couple of decades before we see that mining energy sources are transitioned to renewable energy appropriately, as well as the transmission difficulties accounted with a high power demand and high installation costs.
Next part, I want to mention about the microgrid benefit for the long-term Australian renewable energy. So first of all, the microgrid is considered to be the most powerful tool for promoting local consumption of renewable energy. A microgrid can utilize local distributed energy sources to maintain essential power supply service. The solar photovoltaic microgrid and take advantage of understanding of the distributed solar intensity in Australia. The microgrid can promote the local consumption of solar energy and thirdly increasing the social welfare. Secondly, with the using of the microgrid can be saving power transmission load and also improving the energy efficiency. As seen in the graph below, for the microgrid, because of its directly distribution at the user end, the transmission loss is almost zero. So compared to the main power grid, the microgrid can save the transmission loss. Finally, including the PV arrays, wind power, and also other distributed power generation, as well as the energy storage system. It can be create advantage to microgrid in improving power supply, reliability, and also resisting emergency. The microgrid can be independent of the main power grid to achieve self-sufficiency in power supply, so as to achieve the flexibility in power supply. When extremely natural events cause several power systems to be blackout in the main grid, the microgrid can survive after such event and also recovery the power supply, especially for the critical load. It also focus on the value of the microgrid in resistant emergency and also propose a new market mechanism to quantify the value of emergency energy transaction of multi-renewable energy generation microgrid system. And the last thing I want to talk about is about some policy and so regulation. So Australia and the state-based game funds were only applied to the small scale system and it's mostly a PV. So it can see very clearly that the small scale is not the solar, the renewable energy doesn't apply, have the fund, wasn't fund and support much from the government for the large scale system. It can be seen
Okay, so that was team 5. So if we could have team 5 unmute their mics. We have a bunch of questions that we'd like to ask you.
Yep.
Okay, so I guess the first question is, with regards to the recommendation that nuclear should not be considered over low-risk renewable energy sources, how would you rate the energy efficiency of nuclear to that of other energy sources?
So that was my part, but I didn't actually look into the efficiency. But like, if Australia's trying to go into clean renewable energy, nuclear, like just disposing nuclear waste produces greenhouse gases. So whereas like Australia has enough natural energy to utilize, so it doesn't really have nuclear. Well, that's what I got from my research. So I'm not sure about the efficiency.
Okay. Then some other things. Could you please elaborate on your microgrid model, both in terms of feasibility and reliability?
In regards to the team member that did that, it's not here, but yeah, a lot of the research went into smaller grids compared to your national grids, your big stage stuff, and there's a lot of limitations in regards to the establishment of these grids, simply because they're not on one unified circuit, rather separated, and because of this, it kind of ties into my part a bit with they're having difficulties aligning up a lot of the technologies on the circuit, mainly because of how spaced out everything is. For example, a lot of these microgrids are run out in rural areas that have big power demand. I went on about mines and stuff like that would use a lot of these smaller power grids. But in terms of your efficiency, stuff like that, they're operating at a reasonable efficiency, but there's definitely need of improvement. That will come down to your transmission losses, your technologies. A lot of those technologies are old, well, aging at this point. But yeah, there was significant improvements in the integration of these newer renewable technologies. Would be quite difficult given the mixing and matching of those onto the smaller grids, as well as connecting them into our larger overall grid.
Okay. Yeah. And I guess you talked about the geothermal stations. Do any of you know which parts of Australia that would be more suitable in? Because that's not something that's really considered in Australia. So is there any particular reason?
Geothermal, I think I didn't look specifically, but a quick read was that it was in I think the north side of Australia, where there's a lot of good sources, but the problem is that they're too far away from any power grids and industrial areas, so which is why at the moment they're not that feasible.
Yep. Okay. And I guess final question, if nobody else asks, have you looked at the energy storage solutions to improve energy security from these renewable solutions and microgrids?
I had a brief look at energy storage that was to do with the solar thermal. There was a lot of difficulties there established with heat storage naturally. In regards to other technologies, it is quite difficult just because it comes down to your differing demands and matching those demands with or differing supply levels as well, with matching them with different demands. Obviously, as noted, that changes during the day, so your storage would have to alter to that. Currently, there's no control unification, so no matching guidelines as to managing all these, and obviously letting all the energy out of your storage. That has to be designed to the storage unit and matched to the system, so there's another level of complexity there. In regards to that, that was more with a solar technology, because that's where I focused. You can look at wind technologies. The storage of that is, a lot of that has to do with long distance transmission and storage back onto energy grids that have already been, the storage containers have already been pre-made. So you have to integrate that made energy source into an old technology. And in regards to that, that's kind of where I focused. I haven't really looked at nuclear storage
or other like geothermal, that kind of stuff. But there's definitely considerations you have to take relative to location, to source output, the amount that's coming in, your voltage, currents, all that kind of stuff, as well as your control systems that are based around it. You've got to meet your demands, meet your variations, meet your supporting network equipment, so you don't fry your systems or anything like that. But yeah, there's definitely considerations based around that.
All right. Okay, so that's all the Q&A done. Thank you, Thomas and Leon, for asking those questions, answering those questions. So that was team 5, everyone. Keep that in your thing. So we've had team 5, and Gene Energy was the first team. Yep. So just want to make sure that I clarify this. So there's the website for doing the poll. So make sure to ask your questions there. And if the person answering your question, while answering the question, if you want some sort of clarification, please make sure to clarify on the Zoom chat, so I can maybe bring that up if it's relevant. Okay. So with that, we now move on to the third team, Source Consulting.
Hello everyone, we are SOS Consulting. And we're here to address some of the key challenges that Australia is facing in terms of energy economy and in its landscape. The major one being the heavy reliance on, and there's also the lack of energy and climate policy and political instability, which slows things down, and in cases of long-term commitments and sustainability targets. We also face larger energy consumptions every year, which puts the security aspect of the current energy layout at risk. So to tackle that, we have a few recommendations to make. First one being the hydrogen economy, which is something Australia is already looking forward to and has placed itself as a key player. We can see that hydrogen is extremely versatile as a source of energy, as that it covers all major energy expenditures. It goes from transport to power generation. Australia also has the necessary resources as well as transmission systems in place to begin its expansion in the segment. We can see over here that what the potential of laying hydrogen production centers looks like, and it's pretty concentrated around heavily populated areas and already existing electricity transmission lines, which helps the cause. Hydrogen is a convenient energy storage alternative. Convenient because it has a high energy capacity, more than petrol or diesel. And the fact that, as you saw in the previous slide, major cities and highways are connected across the coastline, they have access to seawater as a resource which helps ramp up production. Fuel cells, incorporating fuel cells and hydrogen power turbines in the power sector would significantly drop carbon emissions close to the rate of 1,000 tons of CO2 per megawatt. Of course, it's not without its own demerits. We know that hydrogen storage and its round trip efficiency is pretty low, and which shows that technology-wise we're not there yet when it comes to efficiency and feasibility, which actually carries forward to costs going up by around 5 to 6 times. So the major recommendations would be to increase investments and ramp up pilot projects and learn from global endeavors like those in Norway and Italy, which can lead to like increase in the job creation, especially in regional areas. And there is a pre-existing export market for hydrogen in countries like Japan, South Korea, and other European countries. And consequently, there would be a decrease in imports in terms of gas and diesel. So on to Jordan for nuclear energy.
Awesome. So why nuclear? Australia has great potential for nuclear power integration due to its existing regulatory bodies, well-established uranium mining industry, and favourable geography. Nuclear is also one of the safest energy generation resources at 0.04 per terawatt hour. 0.04 deaths per terawatt hour, but also the most feared. So the benefits are environmentally, it has the lowest acidifications and eutrophication potentials among all other power generation technologies, the lowest relative land use as indicated by the graph on the top left, and fully contained emissions and effluents due to its small and innately manageable waste streams. The UMPNA report in December 2006 stated that nuclear power is the least cost, low emission technology that can provide baseload power. Additionally, other non-power uses for nuclear technology exist, such as nuclear medicine, disease control, and water purification. So what are some of the complications? Well, the main issue for implementation of nuclear power generation in Australia seems to be derived from social aspects such as culture and public opinion. An anti-nuclear movement developed in Australia in the 1970s, initially focusing on prohibiting nuclear weapons testing and limiting the development of uranium mining and export. The movement also challenged the environmental and economic costs of developing nuclear power. During this time, several states imposed prohibition acts centered around nuclear power implementation, and later a federal act formed in 1999, all of which remain in place today. Most approaches to gain traction on nuclear power in Australia get bogged down in political rhetoric as seen in the past. So where do we go from here? Well, an upheaval in Australia's antagonisation is key to starting. Is the key to start implementing nuclear power. In May 2016, a royal commission into the nuclear fuel cycle was conducted. A major recommendation was an international waste repository for used nuclear fuel and intermediate level waste. It found that the state has necessary attributes and capabilities to develop a world-class waste disposal facility and to do so safely, economically generating more than $100 billion in excess, which would pave the way for nuclear implementation in Australia. Now on to Ollie.
Thank you, Jordan. The third strategy we are recommending is the implementation of a strong climate policy, an energy policy, and in particular, a carbon tax or carbon pricing structure. There is overwhelming support from economists, as well as the IMF and the IEA, on the effectiveness of a carbon tax, as it is the most effective and cost-efficient tool to meet the climate emergency. The benefits of a carbon tax are seen in the success stories of Sweden and Canada, both of whom have successfully significantly cut greenhouse gas emissions and met sustainable living goals, even surpassing those countries without carbon pricing policy. In Canada, a strong rebate plan protects the most vulnerable groups while also reinvesting in sustainable technology. Canada and Sweden therefore show that a carbon tax allows for businesses and industry to find the most cost-effective and appropriate solution, rather than relying on cumbersome and heavy-handed regulation. Possible complications for implementing carbon tax include balancing rebates and a strong rebate plan to ensure an inherently regressive tax remains progressive. There's also a carbon pricing floor that needs to be negotiated to ensure that domestic industry remains competitive. Finally, the current global average carbon pricing is at $2, well below the moderate estimation of the social cost at $100 per tonne. Incrementally increasing and in getting the carbon price right is paramount to the success of the carbon tax. Therefore, our recommendation for Australia in terms of feasibility, considering that Australia's political and policy landscape is shifting year to year, impeding progress significantly, is to implement an incrementally increasing carbon pricing policy, supported by complementary policies and technologies, as Mena and Jordan have already touched on already, to help Australia meet its energy crisis. I'll pass on to Josh now.
Okay, so starting with energy efficiency, I just wanted to frame up the importance of energy efficiency with this quote from IEA's recent Energy Efficiency Forum from last year. So the efficient world scenario results in an early emissions peak and around 40% of the abatement required by 2040 to be in line with Paris targets. Energy efficiency is indispensable to achieving global climate targets. So looking more locally, within Australia, there are three key sectors that can benefit the most from energy efficiency projects. We've got transport, buildings, households and appliances, and industry and manufacturing. And what we do know is that on average, for every dollar invested in energy efficiency, this will pay back up to 3 times the amount in energy saved over the lifetime of the equipment used or the project in place. So moving on to the benefits. One key benefit links back to Australia's key problem of its aging coal fleet, and that is energy efficiency will deliver deferred need for new power plants and grid infrastructure. It will lead to reduced pollution, which will help us in achieving our Paris commitments, enhance production capability and improve profit margins for business, which is a core aspect for getting businesses on board, and reduced consumer spend on energy, which is the main benefit for end users and residents. Looking at the blockers and complications faced within Australia, the number one complication is funding, which is primarily governed by the regulatory landscape and political policy. And what we can see from the graph on the right-hand side there is amongst energy efficiency and a host of other energy-related policies is the variation in investment. And you can see the peaks and troughs there, they're quite significant. And this instability in long-term focus is what can cause businesses to withdraw their participation. Moving on to the recommendations, the key recommendation is for the long-term commitment to funding and strategic direction for Australia's energy efficiency policy. For example, to align it to the 2050 Paris commitments, immediately increase new investments and ramp up existing programs of work like smart cities. What would be good to see as well is the implementation or a new equivalent of the Energy Efficiency Opportunity Program, which was a highly successful program run by the federal government, which finished in 2014. This type of program will be pivotal to supporting behavioural shift of large enterprises towards supporting energy efficient operations. And a often overlooked lever to pull is looking at the non-financial incentives that can be brought to bear to promote energy efficiency. So take, for example, in the building sector, utilising height and density bonuses or expedited planning approvals, things that cost the taxpayer very little but deliver a great benefit to the businesses involved, is a great lever for the government to pull there. So, in conclusion, what we see in terms of the core pillars for the future of Australia's energy landscape is hydrogen, nuclear energy, a strong carbon policy, and good energy efficiency policies as well. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you guys for that wonderful presentation. It was really interesting to see what you guys outlined and what you guys identified as what could become obstacles to energy implementation. If we have a look at I think I've lost the link.
Yeah, so could you just make sure all the people in that team just unmute your mics, so for Q&A. Okay, I'll ask the first question. So hydrogen The question I ask, hydrogen technology is already feasible when it comes to early implementations. What would make it a competitive fuel source in terms of efficiency and cost? We must make sure that all the projects are left open to changes in technology.
Yeah, that was actually my response to the question that was asked earlier.
Okay.
So the question that was asked was I guess when would you expect the hydrogen technology to reach a point to be feasible? And like that was my response. What I meant to say was when I said like we're not there yet was like hydrogen technology is like related to extracting energy out of hydrogen and producing hydrogen itself is very quick in developing. Like we can see changes occurring in that segment pretty frequently as over the last few years. So so what I meant to say was we can't since we can't predict in the particular direction how hydrogen extraction etc would go about. We have to leave it open to sort of incorporate any future changes that would increase efficiency and bring down costs. So as for that question, it is feasible right now to set up to sort of set up a base foundation for hydrogen economy, and we can see that in countries like Norway, where they've set up a hydrogen sector for transport. They've got like a highway where they've set up refueling centers, etc. They've had a contract with Japanese countries like Toyota and Honda to make their vehicles which run on hydrogen. So those are technologies which we can implement right now in Australia, and it would help a lot in bringing down emissions. But I guess the only thing we need to look forward to in terms of making this project more feasible is the ability to extract hydrogen at a lower cost. Italy was tried to run power stations that run on hydrogen, and as you can see from the presentation they've had, like they were successful, but the costs were pretty high for the electricity they generated. So that's again another aspect of lack of technology in that era, in that time where it was set up. So yeah, we have to keep it really open for to see any developments.
Thanks, Manhar. Another question. So why should Australia kickstart the carbon tax policy given it was repealed before?
Okay, so two of our team members aren't here, and I think both of them were really well connected with each other with regards to energy efficiency operation and the carbon policy as well. I'll have a crack, but I think the main takeaway is there needs to be a policy shift that indicates the values of the energy resources that we're trying to sell and pump out and invest in and develop. And you can't really do that unless you have a unanimous kind of overarching sort of culture shift and everyone's on the same sort of boat. And I think a carbon tax is a simplistic way of doing that. It mightn't be the correct answer. It might still need a lot of polishing, particularly for a country such as Australia, which has a relatively new developed kind of political system compared to a lot of other countries that have been kicking around for a few centuries. Australia, as a modernized, developed nation, has a lot of improvement to do in regards to how it treats everyone around, and particularly how it treats the environment. So I think culturally and like behaviorally, there needs to be some sort of restructure. And I think politically, an answer to that is some form of carbon tax, which has been seen to have worked in a lot of European nations, which I know doesn't directly correlate to us because we're big and different and on the other side of the equator, but it's a solution that has worked for others, and it's something that's worth looking into.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for that, Jordan. Thank you both, Jordan and Manhar, for answering the questions. And that was SOS Consulting, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so just reminding you all to you can ask the questions on the polling site, poll EV, and also if you're just someone who doesn't ask a question but you really agree with one of the questions on the site, you can give a thumbs up to it so I can make sure to actually ask it compared to all the other questions that are there. And yeah, so now we are going to sorry, gotta make sure I share the screen.
Hello everyone. Today my group and I will be presenting our findings on some of the energy sectors around the globe, in particular France and Germany. We will also be going over some of the best aspects of the energy policy, and more importantly, how these policies can be molded and adopted into our rather largely coal-based energy sector and transform it into a sustainable one. We will also talk about the challenges that we may face during this transition and how some smart solutions such as decentralization and energy storage can play a big part in this. Also, we will be answering a rather big question, which is nuclear energy a viable option at all? Now, I'll hand it over to Will, who will be talking about the Australian energy sector in greater detail.
Australia relies upon a predominantly coal-based energy market that is slowly transitioning towards a future energy landscape dominated by new renewable technologies. With currently 60% of Australia's national electricity generated by coal, only 17% in total generated by a mix of renewable sources, as can be seen in the data from the Australian Government 2020 Energy Update. However, within the last 5 to 10 years, there has been much larger growth within the renewable sectors, as can be seen in the timeline from the Department of Energy, Environment and Energy, but this increase is still not enough to help move Australia away from fossil fuels. Due to this sluggish transition away from fossil fuels, the Australian energy market is reaching a tipping point in which there is a rapidly approaching end to the life of Australian coal-fired power stations. What this means is that Australia must either build new power stations, extend the life of these stations, or speed up the transition process to a new renewables-based energy market. In its current state, the key strength of Australia's energy market is the consistent and reliable provision of energy to residential and industrial consumers. However, the current forms of energy production in Australia lack the ability to forecast resource scarcity while also posing serious threats to global environments and ecosystems. As a consequence of this, the energy sector in Australia must shift its focus from utilising traditionally reliable coal-fired generation and instead turn the attention toward investing in economic, environmental and sustainable energy technologies. Australia's current centralised grid is not fully equipped to transition and integrate a totally renewable energy generation system, such as wind and solar. This is because these types of intermittent generation methods have large limitations due to the nature of current storage methods and available periods of energy generation. This can lead to steady and unreliable provision of electricity into the Australian energy grid. The key improvements that must be made to Australia's grid to allow for smooth and stable transitionary period is an increase in decentralisation of the energy grid, while also investing heavily into appropriate energy storage methods. The map that can be seen shows the proposed zones that have been put forward by the AMEO for decentralised renewable generation around Eastern Australia, helping with moving forward with the renewables transition.
Germany's current energy mix is 40% renewables, 19% brown coal, and with a mixture of other energy sources making up the balance. Germany's main energy goal is to have no coal power by 2038. Their 2050 80% to 95% decarbonisation goal just puts them on track to meet the bare minimum Paris Agreement target. Decarbonisation goals could be more ambitious when transferring this to the Australian landscape. Germany has successfully phased out black coal with no job losses and plans to use the same strategies to phase out brown coal. Through transitioning East Germany's coal-based economy and concentrating new solar and wind projects in these regions where appropriate. This plan has been made in conjunction with coal unions, federal, local governments, and also has bipartisan support. In Australia, a strong plan to phase out coal may be socially difficult to implement due to our more divisive society compared to Germany's. However, if this hurdle is overcome, similar ideas could be implemented. The phasing out of nuclear after Fukushima was a popular idea among the German citizens, and the goal to have no nuclear by 2022 was implemented. This left a gap in the German energy grid, which it used to its advantage to fill with more renewables. Coal is becoming increasingly less profitable due to ageing plants and the decreasing production cost of renewables. In Germany, electricity is expensive. However, the changing energy market has decreased electricity sales by €16 per megawatt hour. Studies out of the Australian National University have found that the transition to solar and wind could save Australians up to $18 per megawatt hour. However, this would have to be supplemented with changes in the grid structure. Some technologies and ideas that have helped Germany's transition include expanding generation area by using offshore wind farms, solar farms, and multi-level government policy. 50% of Germany's grid capacity is generation capacity, and renewables have been spread all over the country to increase connectedness within the regions and replace stability that coal and nuclear did provide. Australia would have to have a wide renewable spread and generation capacity to allow this stability. Onshore and offshore wind farms could be used down south where wind is stronger, and solar plants could be used in the northern states where sunlight is stronger and more frequent. Findings out of the Australian National University also say that the renewable transition storage increases within the grid. The renewable transition requires storage increases within the grid, decentralisation, and the increasing grid connection within the states to match the stability of coal and gas. Current regulatory instruments and changes in carbon policy can help facilitate this transition.
Known as the nuclear powerhouse of European energy, France has a unique approach to addressing climate change and energy supply. They have a consumption-based energy mix of 47% fossil fuels, 46% nuclear, and 7% renewables. France aims to progressively increase the renewable capacity while simultaneously decreasing their nuclear dependence. Outlined in the Energy Transition for Green Growth Act from 2015, along with other national emission targets, policies, and sector-based legislative changes, France aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 40%, reduce fossil fuel consumption by 30%, and increase renewable energy share to 40%, all by 2030. And most uniquely, they aim to reduce energy consumption by 20% by 2030. Thanks to their strong nuclear backbone and abundance of low-carbon electricity generation, France is uniquely positioned to make changes to their energy grid without risking the loss of energy supply, and this allows for a unique approach. The approach of consumption reduction is underused in other parts of the world, especially in Australia, as consumption continues to rise drastically. As they have actioned these targets by providing zero-interest eco-loans to finance energy refurbishment for everyday homeowners, increasing household energy efficiency, establishing an energy poverty fund to provide modern energy access and efficient equipment to vulnerable households, and providing incentives for programs such as the use of electric vehicles, including charge station infrastructure upgrades and tax breaks. This is possibly the greatest takeaway from France's energy grid. It is near impossible to be truly sustainable while energy consumption continues to rise. By taking measures to drastically decrease carbon intensity, it eases pressures on sustainable energy efforts, grid changes, and energy supply as a whole.
Commenting on the successfulness of energy source changes, considering the advantages and challenges posed by the Australian energy landscape, the implementation of more sustainable and clean energy will be difficult but not entirely impossible. Australia's energy landscape is currently 79% fossil fuel based. Therefore, the economy and policies are relying on fossil fuel heavily. Introducing more wind and solar sourced energies may not be well accepted. Therefore, it is possible that those changes aren't going to shift the market largely. Furthermore, Australia's current centralised grid design is not fully equipped to integrate renewable energy generation and is heavily dependent on large-scale energy production. Proposed strategies can resolve these problems, however, can be difficult to apply. Additionally, nuclear energy itself is a renewable energy source. However, the material uranium-235 used in nuclear power plants is very rare. This makes nuclear energy non-renewable. On the positive side, Australia is also willing to shift its energy market and are making the implementations of new energy sources easier. As coal is being phased out and replaced with other energy sources, opportunities are created for other, more sustainable energy sources such as wind, solar, and nuclear energy to in turn flourish in the market. Australia is making progress to become a more environmentally sustainable country. Renewable energy sources are welcomed because it can largely reduce carbon emissions and are environmentally sustainable. At the moment, the New Technology Scheme, Emerging Generation and Energy Storage, EGES, is able to ease the transition from coal and fossil fuel to renewables such as wind and solar. By interconnecting grids within states can increase the storage capacity of electricity, therefore including electricity grid stability. All those things Australia's been doing can make the transition to renewable energies more successful.
The successful implementation of the discussed strategies will impact Australians in both the short and long term. The negative effects associated with the energy transition will mainly influence remote areas that are dependent on coal mining, but will also impact developed areas and cities as well. Despite the global concern for rising carbon emissions, quality of life for a population is a government's responsibility to maintain. Accordingly, it is evident that the carbon reduction plans will threaten remote regions of Australia in the short term, as regional towns and communities are heavily dependent on the coal industry. Consequently, to avoid rapid economic depressions in isolated communities, the transition to renewable energy sources must account for regional employment and thus provide new industries which allow for a shift of employment from coal and mining. Looking long term, a reduction in carbon emissions impacts Australian assets and environments transitioning into the future. Renewable energy sources such as solar and wind are not as reliable as the current methods of energy production due to the reliance on specific weather conditions. Thus, to overcome the long-term energy requirements, diversification of energy source production is essential to ensuring that energy demands can be matched at all times, regardless of weather or other external factors. In addition, committing to renewable energy is constructive for Australia's interests in the long term due to potential future markets that involve renewable energy. Furthermore, by integrating sustainable energy sources, the conservation of marine and land environments, including the Great Barrier Reef and many other attractions, will clearly benefit Australia shifting into the future. Thank you for listening.
Okay. So, thank you, Sensei Consulting. So if you could just unmute your mics for Q&A.
There.
Yep. Okay, that's good. So I guess the first question, which we got 4 upvotes on, how large was Germany's original black coal workforce and how did they transition the jobs?
So I'm not 100% sure exactly how large it was, but I know it was large, and I think previous to the phasing out of coal did contribute quite a large chunk of into Germany's energy market, sort of similar to Australia. And sorry, what was the other question about phasing out?
How did they transition the jobs?
Okay, so they worked with a lot of union executives, local governments, and federal governments, and they all pretty much got together. There was a lot of bipartisan support to get legislation through Parliament, and that's And basically the plan was to have no job losses at all, and everyone was pretty much given a new job in a industry. Mainly it was in the union industries, and or early retirement if they were old enough. And so basically a lot of cooperation is how they did it. Whether that would be implementable in Australia is another question, given we're not as cohesive as a society as Germany. And and we don't have the same system of government, and we don't have those as strong interconnecting levels in our government system.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And the second question that's asked a lot was, how was France able to finance zero interest loans? Is that something that is feasible here in Australia?
So I wasn't quite sure on exactly how they finance loans. In a package of their Green Act, they introduced a bunch of extra carbon taxes and industry taxes, which they aim to pay for the Green Target Act. Whether or not that is directly relatable to what we do in Australia, it's unlikely. I think, as we mentioned in the presentation, the greatest takeaway from that is possibly one of the most overlooked aspects of reducing our emissions and fixing up our energy sector, and that is looking at the demand side of things and knowing that we can't truly be sustainable, we can't truly make a change in reducing our energy-based emissions until we actually stop increasing our overall consumption. So that was the main takeaway, and maybe looking at a shift towards whether it was the carbon tax I mentioned in earlier presentations, or finding a way to get people to start decreasing the overall carbon intensity of Australia.
Yeah, fair enough. Yep, and is upgrading the grid infrastructure a higher priority in comparison to renewable energy? So I guess that's asking more about which one's more important in your thing. Is it like the grid infrastructure, like transmission distribution, or the renewable energy production?
Well, I think they obviously go both hand in hand, but I think they're on two very different spectrums. So a lot of our transmission, a lot of it's subsidised by government policy and managed by our parliament. And that's been one of the ongoing issues of our energy market and energy sector, is the lack of development of our technology, because as we understand around the world, that politicians often only look for a 4-year period. We haven't seen any long-term commitments. And in the same way that I think, because our energy market is obviously privatised, and a lot of the funding and investment guides in which way our energy market goes, I think we'll inevitably see an increase in renewable energies and a shift towards coal as that money begins to shift away from that, and we'll be forced to upgrade the grid in turn, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense.
And I would say a lot of, and one of the images we used, the AMEO have been working on is looking at like decentralizing the grid, like building renewables across the east coast of Australia, especially a lot inland as well. And that goes a lot, ties hand in hand in both, building renewables, obviously getting the grid towards a greener energy mix, but that goes hand in hand with upgrading infrastructure, adding that like higher level intensity infrastructure across more of Australia, instead of having it just connect to like where the historical coal stations have been.
Yep, that's good. All right, thanks for that. We've got to move on to the next one. So thanks, Sensei Consulting. Thank you, Will, Tom, and Isabella, for answering the questions. And now, last but not least, we've got the last team, which is KDR Energy Consulting.
Australia is arguably behind the times with regards to sustainable energy technologies, with many people still questioning the benefits of renewable energy as opposed to traditional fossil fuels. The main reason that countries are switching to sustainable methods is due to the innate fact that fossil fuels are not forever fuels. Australia is renowned for its beautiful beaches and abundance of flora and fauna. The disappearance of these natural beauties is Australia's biggest climate emergency. Decarbonisation is the core goal behind global climate action. This is especially integral to the health of Australia as the country is ravaged by severe bushfires on an annual basis. The recent 2019-2020 Black Summer fires polluted the air with anywhere between 650 million and 1.2 billion tonnes of carbon dioxide. This is in addition to the average annual Australian emissions of approximately 531 million tonnes. These unprecedented natural disasters can be linked to record highs in national temperatures as a direct result of climate change. The chain effect, as seen here, sparks the need for long-term energy goals to protect Australia's greatest assets. The current energy mix for Australia, as presented here, shows that 96% of Australia's energy consumption comes from fossil fuels. The renewable energy target was introduced in 2001, setting the goal that by 2020, 33,000 gigawatt hours per annum of electricity would be sourced from renewables. This is equivalent to approximately 23.5% of Australia's energy generation. Although this goal was met in 2019, 1 year before scheduled, Australia lacks any long-term energy goals. This leaves the country looking elsewhere to try and find solutions from our overseas neighbours. There are many different sources of sustainable energy at our fingertips. We can see on the left-hand side of the slide here that there's a list of energy sources that are 100% renewable, coming directly from the free energy in our atmosphere. This includes the increasingly popular wind power. The UK is undoubtedly the global leader in wind energy. As it can be seen here, approximately 21% of the UK's energy generation for 2019 came from wind power. This is enough energy to power just under 16 million homes per annum, according to data from Renewable UK. Although they are smashing goals when it comes to wind power, the UK is making large commitments to the decarbonisation of the planet. In 2008, the Climate Change Act was introduced, outlining the goal of an 80% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions relative to the 1990 baseline by 2050. This is in conjunction to the 5-year carbon budget set 12 years in advance and the intended £4.8 billion investment into wind energy within the next decade. The US is another great example for Australia to investigate. Nuclear power in the US provides more than 809,000 gigawatt hours yearly. It is responsible for over 90% of the nuclear reactors worldwide, making it a global leader in energy production. The capital and EPC costs of nuclear power are what make it such a costly energy source. This is offset by the fact that nuclear power is over 8,000 times more efficient than fossil fuels, with an approximately 20,000 times higher energy content. Because uranium undergoes a fission reaction, there is no net output of CO2 as a result of energy generation. The cost of nuclear can be further reduced by mining uranium in large batches. This works favourably for Australia, as an estimated 49% of the global uranium deposits lie within Australian borders. There are many factors to consider when making decisions that not only affect the nation, but also have a large global influence. The UK offers great insight into the inner workings of wind power, and the US with nuclear. Australia can look towards other countries for ideas on climate initiatives to assist in the mitigation of irreparable damage to the planet.
Hi guys, my name is Darren and we'll be going through some of the implications and obstacles when it comes to implementing nuclear energy. I'm sure we're all aware of the nuclear ban that had pretty much occurred just over 2 decades ago, which involves these 2 acts, which is the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act 1999 and the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Act 1988. To even begin considering nuclear development in Australia, Act 1999 will be the first thing that has to be amended. Now, Act 1998 might not be an immediate obstacle, as it is only applicable to Commonwealth entities and such. And so, therefore, someone well, an entity like the state government or private sector developer can actually begin consideration of developing nuclear power for Australia. Despite Australia being the third largest producer of uranium in the world, Australia does not actually have any facilities to enrich or manufacture fuel rods, which are commonly used in the nuclear reactors. The idea was considered in 1970s, but was completely scrapped when Labour Party assumed an anti-nuclear stance. This infrastructure would also require a multi-billion-dollar investment, and no such investment would happen unless there's support from both political parties. So what are the implications of nuclear power? Well, in the short term, we might start seeing consumers getting reduced power bills and overall a better system reliability. Overall, in the long term, we might see Australia develop a high-value nuclear industry, such as those in countries like Canada, and may start participating in the ongoing nuclear research and development for nuclear energy. While in the long-term run, Australia would have swapped to renewables, I believe that having nuclear complements the renewable energy power in terms of reliability. Once Australia actually has projects running for developing nuclear power plants, I believe they can look at the US policy, the US Energy Policy Act 2005, which basically does a lot of federal funding, which includes loan guarantees for advanced nuclear reactors, and they support advanced nuclear technology as well. There's also a federal risk insurance of $2 billion to cover regulatory delays during the full power nuclear plant operation. While I don't see Australia being funded that much to that kind of scale in the near future, I still believe that federally it will help support the growth of nuclear technology.
We have now explored the usage of wind and nuclear energy in the US and the UK. So how can these strategies be implemented in Australia? Currently, 23% of the world's uranium production already occurs in Australia. Despite the sourcing advantage, uranium is 20 to 50% more costly to produce than coal. However, due to the nature of nuclear energy's low emission technology, it provides a reliable alternative to coal. Greenhouse gas reductions from nuclear power are predicted to reach 8 to 17% of Australia's emissions in 2050. Regarding health and safety, nuclear poses less of a risk of impacts than coal, gas, and hydro-generated power. Nuclear reactor designs are now safer and more efficient, as is the storage and disposal of radioactive waste, thus reducing the risk of nuclear disasters such as the Chernobyl power plant explosion of 1986. Now let's talk about the implementation of wind energy. Past assessment of Australia's potential wind power resource indicates that wind energy is well suited to Australia's climatology. A large expanse of the country's southern region is well suited as it has highly reliable wind sources. However, the lack of wind availability is in more densely populated areas in the eastern region of the country poses limitations with connecting energy from the south to the east of the country. This is one of the challenges that the implementation of wind power in Australia has. Navigating the social cultural landscape of Australia is also another challenge faced. According to an article from the Energy Policy Journal, community engagement is key in the future success of any new decision, as it is necessary to achieve an outcome that is fair and fits into the community. Ultimately, the social support and acceptance of new wind and nuclear energy technologies are what ensures the long-term success of the policy decision.
Okay, so that was KDR Energy Consulting. Quite a good presentation, short and sweet. So if all the participants could unmute their mics so we can get ready. So I guess the first question is, and before I say anything, if the mentors want to ask a question as well, feel free to ask the question through the group chat. And yeah, so first question, do you see a high value nuclear industry, as you mentioned, Darren, as a positive or negative impact in Australia?
Okay, so can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I definitely see it as a positive thing because not only are you creating jobs, but when it comes to sort of nuclear industry, it's kind of a really broad term because not only are you talking about power generation, but there are things like medical uses for radioisotopes, and that we are also utilizing our the uranium deposits within our borders as well. So we're not just exporting it.
Yeah. Okay. And do you think Australia isn't investing enough in wind power?
Well, as per the presentation, there's an underuse area of land in the southern region of the nation. So I feel like that would be a good, it would be good to utilize that land.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So all right, one more. Okay. The one questioner asked. So I like the part about community engagement. Have you seen that done effectively in your analyzed countries to achieve change, such as changing the Aussies public's attitude towards nuclear?
Not in particular. The majority of research that we've done on it has a mostly negative view on nuclear.
But how about in general, like other things in your analyzed country where community engagement has swayed the opinion some other way?
Reagan, did you see anything with the US?
No. There's sort of something along that lines with wind energy in the UK. So they basically gained popularity for that one by implementing it in smaller townships. So they got more job opportunities into smaller towns, and that helped to really boost the popularity of it.
Yeah, if I might add just a bit more to the answer, in the US, the public opinion has generally been quote unquote fairly positive, and that opinion has grown simply because people are thinking about the security of their power supplies.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Got about one more minute. So if anyone else wants to ask a question, feel free to do so. Okay. Okay, well, I guess everyone liked it then. Thanks for that, KDR Energy. Yeah, that concludes our presentation night. So before you all leave, we've got about 30 participants here. What I'd like to do is I'd like to open up the polls for voting for your favorite team. So just to reiterate who went first and last. So you have Gene Energy that went first. Then you have UQCEN Team 5 that went second. Source Consulting went third. Sensei Consulting went fourth. And last but not least, KDR Energy went fifth. So if you can all vote for your favorite team before you leave, and I'll pass it on to Jenny as well.
Yes, thank you so much to all the teams who have spent with us for 8 weeks doing this. I know it can be tough with everything going on, and you know, just generally feeling unmotivated towards doing extracurricular work, but we're really grateful that you guys have like stuck on board and kept going with it, and we hope you guys had fun and learned a little bit about other countries' energy systems at the same time, and where the deficiencies are in Australia's energy sector, which yeah, so if you guys just vote, there are prizes to be won, but we'll be in contact with the winning team as to how those how you'll get those prizes and what those prizes are, but it's definitely of value, of monetary value, so that's always like a really big bonus. Yeah.
And just before everyone leaves as well, if everyone has a webcam, could you just make sure to switch it on, because as far as our media time, we're trying to get a whole group photo. It's hard during these times, but yeah, if we can get like a group photo just for our social media and something to put on your LinkedIn's maybe.
Yes. Or also, your presentations are great. And if all teams are okay, also like totally email us and message us if it's not. But if it is okay, we'd also like to pop your presentations up on our social channels. So that might be Facebook, on YouTube, maybe on LinkedIn as well, because they look amazing and great. So yeah, just let us know if that's like not okay privately. Yeah. Have we taken the photo?
That was me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
She's got it. All right. No worries.
All right.
Thanks for that, guys. It's 8 weeks of this. You should give yourselves a pat on the backs. And hopefully.
Thank you very much for organising it. It was good fun.
That, Thomas. Yep. And now we've got the rest of the semester. So hopefully you guys fare well in those as well. Closing remarks, Jenny?
Not really, but good luck for the rest of the semester. I hope you all survive but I don't know what your exams look like these days. Yeah, well, your final assessment, and I hope you guys do the best. And also, we'll probably, for those of you who really enjoyed the program for next semester, there might be, if you liked your facilitators, you might also be asked to be a facilitator, and you can sign up to be one as well. So keep an eye out on your emails if that's something you're interested in. Yeah, but also give like a really big thank you to your mentors. I know we have Stephen and Lynette with us, and Belinda with us tonight, and also a big thank you to your facilitators, because it wouldn't have been possible without them as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think that's all. You guys are free to go. See ya. Have dinner. I don't know.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Well done, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.